So just as a bit of brief background, my name is JD Schramm, and I am extremely excited to be here at Ramba, sharing with you some of the research and some of the work that I have done over the last 5 years with LGBTQ executives and students on how to communicate effectively and how to exhibit executive presence as leaders in our community. And a little bit of a bio background in terms of my relationship to Ramba. I go way back in Ramba years. I was at the second Ramba that ever happened in San Francisco in 1999 when I was an MBA student at NYU Stern. After finishing my MBA, I got appointed to the faculty and I served as faculty advisor to the Stern LGBT group that used to be called Outclass, and now I think it's Stern Pride. But and so I was a part of Ramba nationally from 2006 till I think about 2016, and also a lot of experience with Out for Undergrad, where I served on their board for 10 years. So I have a huge heart for the work that these conferences do and for the folks that are able to participate and attend. And although I have been a lecturer at Stanford for 13 years, before that 5 years at NYU Stern, also taught at Columbia, I'm going to try my best in this webinar to let it not feel like a lecture, even though I can't hear from you except through the chat room. Welcome, LSU, but to keep it as engaging, as interesting as possible. I am going to have a few video clips that I show throughout this, and I'm just going to show excerpts of videos because our time together is so incredibly short. But I will make available afterwards, if you ping me an email, I'm happy to send you links to all of the full videos that I referenced, as well as a copy of the slides and some other resources. So with that said, let me get into share screen mode, and you should now, instead of seeing the Stonewall Tavern, you should see me in a smaller corner of your screen and be able to see my slides, exec presence for the LGBTQ leader. And what my gay agenda today is, I'm going to give you 2 initial communication frameworks, just some frameworks that will give us a sense of what I mean when I'm talking about executive presence in the LGBTQ community. And then I'm going to look at a model that I've created working with execs. For the last 5 years, Stanford has run an executive summer program, a week-long program for senior leaders on their way to the C-suite in LGBTQ leadership. And I've developed the communications curriculum as a portion of that. And so I'm going to share the framework that I use there. But instead of using clips of senior leaders, I'm actually going to use, a mix. I'm going to use a mix of clips from the TED library, the TEDx library, and a library of videos that I curate at Stanford. So I believe really strongly that communication is leadership, and by the transitive property, leadership is communication. Anytime I'm brought into an organization and somebody says we have a leadership issue, usually underneath it, there is a communication issue. And if I'm brought in to work with somebody on their communication ability, they're usually somebody who also needs to work on their leadership ability. Now, there are differences between leadership and communication, but communication, executive presence, is the ability to be sure that as you're leading, people are following, that you're not just speaking out into a vacuum, as it sometimes feels when you're doing a webinar at what used to be a very high energy conference, and we look forward to being that next year. Now I'm going to give you one math fact, and so we've got to go all the way back probably to high school geometry, which for me was sophomore year with Father Harvey Dinkle. I still have PTSD from those days. And I want to remind you what an asymptote is. Now, an asymptote is a line with a curve coming up to it that gets closer and closer and closer, but never touches. if these went up into infinity through the ceiling, through where my kids are playing, all the way up into the sky, the line and the curve would always get closer, but never quite touch. And that concept of an asymptote, I find to be really fascinating as we look at leadership communication, because I feel we should always be striving for that sense of mastery as a leader in our community, and our abilities should get better and better and better. But we're never going to actually be able to achieve that. And so I see that the pursuit of being a great communicator is never over. There's no such thing as a perfect meeting. There's no such thing as a perfect email or a perfect pitch or, I'm sorry, Mr. President, a perfect call. Nothing is ever perfect. In fact, I can sit with some of my students at Stanford and evaluate very remarkable presentations by very senior leaders and still find ways that they could have been better. And that's what mastery is as a communicator, is recognizing you're never going to perfect it, but you always want to get just a little bit better at it. Daniel Pink wrote a great book several years ago about motivation called Drive, the surprising truth about what motivates us. And he talks about 3 levels of motivation: autonomy, having your own sense of direction; mastery, getting better and better at something that matters; and purpose, being a part of something bigger, something greater than ourselves. And it's that definition of mastery that Pink uses that I like to use as I look at leadership communication. It's getting better and better at communicating, but never actually perfecting it. So with those frameworks as a background, before I get into talking about the 4 levers that I see that can help us communicate more effectively, I like to have some sort of a conversation about what it's like to be marginalized. Now, this is harder to do in this sort of setting, but if you're willing, if you would just drop a line or 2 in the chat box about what you see as marginalization and where your experience of marginalization has happened. Maybe in terms of coming out, it may be another part of your being. We can be marginalized for our sexual orientation, for our gender expression, for our political beliefs. I've experienced in my own life, although I have white privilege, and this year with George Floyd's murder, I've come closer and closer to what it means to understand my white privilege. But I certainly have experienced being marginalized, growing up as a gay kid in Western Kansas, growing up as a gay Catholic kid who had a strong faith, but also had an attraction to other men. And that experience of that journey between my faith and my orientation, I often felt marginalized in both communities. Anybody else comfortable sharing an example of what you see as marginalization or what you've experienced as marginalization? And if you don't feel comfortable sharing it in the chat, that's fine. I would like to just have you think through, when have you been pushed to the margin and not given that seat at the table, that opportunity at the table? Because it's in understanding our own marginalization that we become more in touch with our own ability to lead and our own ability to communicate. And being able to be thoughtful about that as you step into greater and greater roles of leadership is one of my requests of you and invitations for you as we look at this experience today. Appreciate some of the perspectives that are coming in. Very easy in the MBA classroom to see everyone else's outsides and how their experiences may look different from ours. Yeah, not having the same freedoms, not having the same rights as others. I have a 2-year-old daughter and 5-year-old son, also a 21-year-old son, and trying to explain to our 5-year-old. She and I went on a Black Lives Matter march with some of her classmates from her school, and trying to explain to her why it was important, and having her understand that experience. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for those who shared. And for those who didn't share, there's no pressure to do that, but just think of the times that you have not had that opportunity to be yourself, and you've been pushed to the side, either directly, as we saw in some of the descriptions, or indirectly in that experience. So in working with this topic of how do we communicate effectively as queer leaders in our community, and I will jump back and forth between queer or gay or LGBTQ or LGBTQ plus. I really don't want my language choices to in any way marginalize any of your experiences, and also for our allies who may be in the room. But sometimes for efficiency or just out of habit, being a gay man in my 50s, I may fall into old habits, but I really want to be inclusive as we look at this leadership model. And that's why I start with that conversation about when have we been marginalized, because all of us have had that experience in one way or another. So I like to look at 4 levers that enable us to be more effective, have greater presence in our experience of communicating with others. And the way this model works is that we would strive to extend our confidence, competence, connection, and clarity as much as possible. In fact, if we could have what I like to call the lavender diamond, that would be the highest score on each of these 4 aspects. And that, again, just like the asymptote, is aspirational, but is not likely that somebody is going to score completely on all 4 of these models. And in fact, at different times in our career, we may have greater competence, greater confidence, greater clarity, greater connection, but we want to think about how we can move forward. So the greater real estate that you're, whether it's a diamond or looks more like a triangle or looks more like a thin little point, the more that I can expand the area of that radar, the greater presence that I'll be able to have with people. When I first introduced this model a couple of years ago, it was at a Victory Fund event in Washington, D.C., and the participants actually did radar analysis of the keynote speakers that they had seen so far in the conference. And it was really interesting to see how they evaluated leaders on each of these 4 scales. So let me talk in greater depth and use some video examples for this. First of all, we'll talk about clarity. If as a leader, what you're asking people to do is not clear, what you're influencing them, the action that you're influencing them to take is not clear, you will not succeed. And so the very first place that I think all leaders inside and outside of our community need to start is with that greater sense of clarity. Einstein said early in his career that, those who make a message more complex, he even called it more violent, that it takes genius or courage to make something simpler. Later in his career, he said it even better: make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. And so I'm not talking about dumbing down your ideas or dumbing down your innovations or your recommendations or your calls for action or justice, but to make it as simple as possible so that people can take the action that we want them to take. Now, I'm going to bring into the conversation one of my friends and colleagues. Those of you from Harvard will recognize Frances Frye, remarkable educator at Harvard Business School. And she did a TED Talk a few years ago and completely blew me away with her TED Talk. First of all, she's the first TED speaker I've ever seen use a chalkboard, like a physical black chalkboard with white chalk. But she told a story about a year of sabbatical that she spent here in San Francisco working for Uber on issues of culture and community. So we're going to pick up her TED Talk about halfway through, and I'm just going to give you 4 or 5 minutes of it. but I want you to get a sense of her commitment to clarity and also to authenticity. Now, authenticity wasn't one of the 4 measures that I talk about, but it's the canvas on which I think those 4 pillars all need to exist. So join me as we go with Frances Fry for a little bit here. And if 1 or 2 people could just let me know that you are hearing the video, seeing the video and hearing the audio, that would be helpful. I love that ending, the key to achieving greater excellence than we've ever known as possible. Her commitment to her being her authentic self and being that role model for her clients and particularly for her students at HBS and in turn for all of us at different business schools is just refreshing to me and exciting to me as I look at. Now, remember the point that we were looking at was the sense of clarity. So I loved her use of the triangle and making the point and the power of that clarity painted on top of a canvas of being your authentic self. So let's move to the next lever, which is the sense of confidence. The way in which we are able to stand or sit in front of a room, the way we're able to express our opinions in writing or in speaking, and to have that sense of confidence about what it is that we have to share with the world. Now, surprisingly, I'm going to go back to Harvard Business School with my next example, but I really like the remarkable work that Amy Cuddy did around presence. In her book, Presence, she talks about that presence isn't about pretending to be competent. It's about believing in and revealing the abilities you truly have. It's about shedding whatever is blocking yourself from expressing who you are. It's about tricking yourself into accepting that you are indeed capable. Sometimes you've got to get out of the way of yourself so that you can be yourself. Particularly for those of us who have had an experience of coming out. This idea of getting out of our own way so that we truly could be ourselves is not uncommon and is not unfamiliar. Now, Amy Cuddy's research has been challenged, and there's an interesting academic debate online if you want me to link you to the journal articles that people have written back and forth about her research. I'm happy to do that. But the heart of her work works for me. It works for the LGBTQ students and execs I've worked with. And so I encourage you to do it for yourself. The heart of her work, and I'm actually going to stop sharing for just a moment so that I can physically demonstrate this. The heart of her work, which you may know her for, is the power pose woman, okay? So she is the person who did the research into the ability and strength that if I strike a huge power pose, if we were in a room at a hotel, I would make all of you get up and do this right now. I don't know where you're participating in the conference room, but if I physically take a huge pose like this, I'm actually changing the chemistry in my body right now. I know some of you may even be trying this right now. Go for it. If you can hold a power pose for 2 minutes, that can be any sort of bra, anywhere where you make your body as expansive and big as it is. What that does, that changes the chemical levels in your brain. Your testosterone goes up, which makes you more confident, and your cortisol goes down, which makes you less anxious. Now, the complete opposite, if you strike the smallest pose you can, if you sit in class waiting to make a comment like this, if you sit waiting for a job interview in the Career Center on your phone, striking a small pose, you are doing the exact opposite to your body. You are actually taking your testosterone levels down and you're taking your cortisol levels up. Her work that she did based on job interviews, based on presentation in the labs at Harvard, she talks about in her 2012 TED Talk and in her book. And while there have been some challenges to it, for me and many of my students, it works. And so I invite you to think about how you can use your physical body as a way to build that sense of confidence and that sense of getting out of your own way to be who you want to be in the settings that you find yourself in. For the MBA students who are in job interviews, it's clear that we need to be able to go in with that sense of confidence. Participating in an MBA class, you know, especially in a class with a high participation evaluation, having that sense of confidence that the power pose or the internal work that we do to create the external confidence can be a powerful part of our journey and our ability to be more confident in how we express ourselves. Finally, let me give you a short video clip. Again, now this is a student of mine from a few years ago at Stanford, Kudzi Chikumbu. When he was in the MBA program, he participated in a program called Low Keynotes, which I encourage you to check out online. It is kind of Stanford's answer to TED Talks. Instead of 18-minute talks, they are 9-minute talks. And I'm just going to give you a portion of the end of his talk, but where he talks about the power of confidence that he experienced. And let's bring Kudzi into this conversation with us now. Again, let me know if you don't have video or audio, and let's hope that you do.
As Marianne Williamson, the author, once wrote, as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people the permission to do the same. When we choose life, we unconsciously give other people the permission to do the same. I went from being a miserable accountant, and I'm an inspired YouTube producer with a mission to light up other people's lives. I'm even building a company with that mission. Who are you now? Who could you be? With the commitment to uncovering your personality and your purpose, imagine what you could do, how big you could play. And in the time since my journey began, I've learned that playing big in the world doesn't have to mean being the CEO of the next best startup in Silicon Valley, or Beyonce at the Super Bowl, or starting your very own YouTube show. We can choose to play big every day by having the courage to choose life, by having the courage to uncover our personality and our purpose. Because once you commit to choosing life, I can assure you that providence will move too, and your light will give other people the courage to do the same. Thank you.
Your light will give other people the courage to do the same. Wished I'd have added it in here. There's a wall that I walk past in San Francisco regularly that has painted on the outside of it, we have the choice to be the candle or the mirror. So either way, we can bring light to the communities that we work in. And as you step out in greater and greater levels of confidence in your expression of who you are, again, tying Kudzi back to what we heard from Francis, you're able to exhibit that in a way that doesn't marginalize us, but actually steps into ownership of what it is that we want to be able to do. So moving around the dial, let me talk about the third lever that I have seen through the research I've done, and that's the lever of competence. Now, competence happens at two levels for me as a communicator. First and foremost is competence in your job. If you are hired to be an associate analyst, then you need to be an associate analyst. If you are hired to be, balancing books or creating marketing plans or selling widgets, whatever your job is to do, you want to be competent at your job. So you want to be sure that is first and foremost, that there's not questions about your ability to do the job you have been hired to do. But additionally, there is a level of competence around how we communicate. If you are in an MBA program that has a robust communications curriculum, I encourage you to take as many communication electives as you can. Get the feedback, get the coaching, get the insights into how you write and how you speak while it is free and easy to do as an MBA student. really hone those skills as a communicator. If you're not in an MBA program, one of the resources, I think it's on the next slide here. No. One of the resources I would guide you to, let me just put this into the chat room, is a Google talk by Kara Alter on the credibility code. This short 1 hour Google talk is a great basic primer on what it takes to do what I'm doing right now, to stand in front of a group of people, here I'm doing it virtually, and be able to deliver information. So you need to have competence both as a speaker, if you're going to be a leader, and in the work that you do. Now, there's a fascinating story that I like in this, which is the next slide here. And I put this into my book without being able to, this is a panel that I heard at that Victory Fund conference a few years ago. And there were 6 people on the panel. I found a photo of 4 of them, but they were all ambassadors who had been appointed by Barack Obama. This was December of 2016, and they knew that, as is tradition in the State Department and tradition throughout government, that at inauguration, they would all be out of a job, that they would be resigning their appointments, and it was highly unlikely that President Trump would renew their appointments. These 6 men, they were all unfortunately white men at this point in our State Department history, but they all had ambassadorial roles appointed by Barack Obama. And 2 of them shared the story. Wally Brewster, who's the furthest person to the right, is who I remember telling the story. He and one of the other ambassadors were in the green room and approved by the Senate on the same day. And so they were waiting to come out and be announced and sworn in as ambassadors. Wally was going to the Dominican Republic, and the other ambassador was going to somewhere in Asia. I can't remember where his duty assignment was, but they were both out gay men with partners going into communities that were not open to having gay leaders. And in fact, the Catholic cardinal in the Dominican Republic had spoken against Wally Brewster being named, and in the Asian country that the other ambassador was going to, they were both going into environments that wouldn't welcome them as out gay men and in roles of leadership. And they said to each other, all eyes are going to be on us, and we will have to do what we do very, very well, because there's no room for error. They knew that they would have to over-index on competence because there would be such scrutiny of them as the first gay appointees as ambassadors of our country in these less welcoming countries. And so being thoughtful about both competence in your job and competence in your ability to communicate. Now, the 4th and final level that we are going to get to is connection. And for me, and this is why this is so hard to do at Ramba in a webinar setting. In fact, right before we began, Julie, who's one of the organizers, she and I were in the room, making sure that I had all the tech working. And she said, now don't forget to hit broadcast before you begin. And I thought, that could actually happen. Like, I could see somebody do their entire 1-hour webinar without hitting broadcast and not realizing that they had been talking to themselves for an hour, which is what my children think Daddy is doing right now. But the 4th and final lever is connection. And I love to do connection in person. I love to do it eyeball to eyeball, sitting down over a cup of coffee or a cocktail. That is the easiest way for me to be able to connect individually with people. It's hard in a Zoom environment. And yet as a leader, whether in a Zoom environment or not, the best way that we can do that is in our use of stories. When you tell a story, you warm and connect yourself to the audience. Stories are more memorable. They can carry meaning. They can be more powerful. And easily, if I have both statistics and story, and I'll often have to blend the 2 into a report that I'm doing or a presentation that I'm delivering. my audience will remember the stories much more than they'll remember the stats. So just to give you, and with stories, ideally also comes humor. So with this, I'm going to share what I think will be my final video clip today. LB Hanna's in his TEDx talk at I think TEDx South Florida. We'll see in a moment here. But I love the way LB begins his talk using stories and vulnerability so that, so that my daughter gets to express her own voice. Wow. As a parent, and this is, I think, the first time I've spoken at Ramba since having my children, but as a parent, it just brings into full relief what it is like when we're not our authentic selves, when we're not able to express authentically who we are and who we believe the world can and should be. And so I have not met LB. I actually need to write LB and let him know how often I use his video clip, because I just get touched each time he shares his story. So that is my challenge to all of you, is to step into your leadership in the LGBTQ plus community in a way that your voice can be heard. And I believe the best focus to do this is to be certain about your clarity, your confidence, your competence, and your connection. And know that you're never going to hit this perfect lavender diamond. I loved the story about the two ambassadors, that they knew they had to over-index on competence because they weren't going to have connection in the area that they were headed into. When I'm new in a job, my confidence may be low because I'm still in training, I'm still learning stuff. And so I may have to over-index on connection. I may have to build those relationships. As my friend Steve Mellis says, I may have to put some cookies in the cookie jar so that I've got some that I can take out later when I need it. And so being thoughtful about how you express yourself across all four of those levers is my invitation and my challenge to all of you. Now, I'm going to share some resources with everyone in a moment here, but first, I am happy to answer any brief questions that are in the chat box. Do know that I will be giving my email in a couple more slides and a way that you can get in touch with me to get the slides and resources. But if there are other questions that I can answer about what I've shared today, feel free to pop those in the chat now. So if some questions pop up in the next bit, I will jump to those. But let me talk about the resources that I think are best. Now, I've already mentioned the Credibility Code and Presence. The third book that I have listed up there is Illuminate by Nancy Duarte and Patty Sanchez. I love Nancy Duarte. She's the only person I know with an Oscar for PowerPoint design. She's the woman who designed the PowerPoints for Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. And we really believe it was her visuals that earned that film, the documentary, the Oscar, rather than his sparkling delivery of them. But these are three of my favorite books as a leader. And in addition to those book titles, I mentioned the Low Keynote Library from Stanford. This is a YouTube library that's got I believe just over 6 million views right now. These are some of our LGBTQ students over the last several years and the talks that they have put up there. It's not a gay program. We've got over 200 talks, but these are some of the ones that, if you want to take a screenshot of that I think you would enjoy doing. Let me go to Jeff's question here. What would I recommend to help with resilience when needing to form many connections in a large enterprise or industry setting? Jeff, it's a great question. I think the best source on resilience, and you probably already know this, is Grit by Angela, I'm losing her last name, Duck. I'll look it up in a moment. But in terms of a strategy for developing grit, I think it really needs to be in small groups, and you need to be strategic, but not manipulative as you build. Angela Duckworth, thank you, Gina Marie. Too many children's books with ducks going through JD's head today. Back to Jeff's question, I think as you look at trying to get to know a large enterprise, or you're new on a job, it's look for individuals in different places rather than feeling like I've just joined this 10,000 person firm. Well, okay, but how many people are in your office, or how many people are at your level or at your function, and break it into small pieces, and then find a way that you can get to know people on an individual level, that connection. And often I find when I'm new in an organization, it's being able to ask for help, being able to acknowledge what I don't know. I've not done this type of work, or I haven't seen this report before. Could you spend some time with me on it? And I think building those alliances in a small, strategic and ongoing way are important. I agree with about half of Keith Ferrazzi's book, Never Eat Alone. I think he's got some great strategies for networking. I think some of them come off as inauthentic, and so I think you need to take his work with a grain of salt. But I think being thoughtful and authentic about it, and really looking at it as individual connections, not this massive organization that I'm trying to reach into. Joshua's question, which I think all of you can read there, being too gay, too out there, is what my husband has often been told, or you're too much. He's a minister, and he's at times had board members who've used that with him. Is it about changing our behaviors to be more straight in certain settings? For example, Tim Cook wouldn't fit into a stereotypical view. No. I don't believe, Joshua, it's about changing our natural expressions to mimic or reflect those who are straight or those who are not marginalized. I really think it's being our authentic selves, but probably in that situation, looking at what do I need to do from a competence point of view and from a confidence point of view. I may never become buddy-buddy with the bros who are in the sales unit, let's say, for example. But if I'm competent at my job, I can interact with them, I can get what I need from them, and I can deliver what I need to them. I think we end up spending too much of our energy trying to be something we're not, because we think that's what we need to get ahead, when really, my belief is we need to be who we are, much like Francis Fry was saying, and let our competence of the work that we do and the quality that we bring to the organization carry the day. With that said, there may be organizations or entities that are not the best place for you. Being at a reaching out conference is where you're trying to look at all of the different firms, all of the different possibilities. And there may be firms, and I don't have anybody in mind, but there may be firms who put on a good show at reaching out, but when you actually intern there, or you actually work there, you don't have that same sense of wholeness and that sense of feeling. And we all spend too much time at our job to not be working somewhere that we're honored. So I don't believe women should act more like men in order to be respected, as some executive presence for women people will claim. I believe we need to do our best at being ourselves and be competent and confident and clear in what it is that we do, and recognize it's not going to work in every situation and in every organization. This isn't the question you asked, but it's just top of mind. I've got to go one more place there, Joshua. I also recognize that I've been talking about this from a very US-centric point of view, and that if you take an overseas assignment with a company and you're in Singapore, or you're in another place that it is, you're stationed in the Middle East, or you're stationed in a conservative country in South America, There may be safety issues at play, as well as legal issues at play in terms of your self-expression. Some people wouldn't take those assignments because they would feel it was too limiting to themselves, and some people would take those assignments because that's the career that they want. All of those are personal choices. We just need to make those choices thoughtfully and not automatically. Matt asked the question about what about navigating a corporate culture of don't ask, don't tell? As many communications professors, my first two words are, it depends. It depends if the straight people, if the non-gay people in the organization are also not talking about their families and where they're going on vacation and where their weekends are. If the don't ask, don't tell is just directed at the gays in the organization, then I would question that. I would challenge that. I lived in a family existence where one of my sisters had the don't ask, don't tell policy around, I couldn't talk about my boyfriends, but she was talking about her boyfriends. And so I think we might need to challenge that if the culture is being inconsistent. And I've also been in workplaces where people really don't bring their personal lives into the workplace. They don't have pictures of their kids on their desks, and that's the climate and the environment. And so if that's the environment and you love the work and the mission that they're doing, I think you can do that. But watch for the double standard is what I would say, Matt, and find gentle but clear ways in which you can challenge the double standard there. Wei Su, great question about the gap between your authentic self and expected leadership behaviors and how to overcome the gap. My best advice there, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Wei Su, my best advice there is to find a mentor in the organization who can be that mirror for you. So, and I'm gonna answer in gay male terms. If I show up Monday after Gay Pride and I am talking about the pier dance and all the guys with their shirts off and the what a wild and crazy time that I had, that may be my self-expression, but that may not be appropriate in a leadership context. And so, I may need to have somebody who's a mentor that can help me look at not issues of equity and equality, but issues of appropriateness. Like, why would you think that story needed to be brought up in the Monday morning sales meeting, the day after Gay Pride? And yet there may be other places where I really do need to speak of my gay experience and my gay expression. And so having somebody who can help you navigate that in the organization so that you don't feel that your self-expression is stifled, but you also begin to learn what parts of your experience fit where. And I got to admit, it's so much easier for me now, a little bit older, and having a husband and children than it was when I was single. It's just easier to drop in parts of my journey when I'm talking to somebody that, oh, we both have kids who are in kindergarten this year. It doesn't matter that I sleep with a man and so does she. It matters that we both have kids in kindergarten. And so those things make it easier. I'm going to jump to Madeline's question, and Colin, Colin, or I'd love to delve into the Baron Munoz piece by email, but let me jump to Madeline's question and then I'll close with some final resources. How to determine if an organization's culture is accepting when we work for them, particularly remotely? What signs should we look for, good or bad? Well, Madeline, the first piece is look at where they stand on the HRC metric. Look at, do they have domestic partner benefits? Do they have, now that we have marriage, that's less of an issue. Where do they stand on trans issues and healthcare for surgery related to transition? Look at all of the check boxes that HRC might look at, and that's a good first view. But that gives you the policy, and you're asking about the culture. Within the culture, I think the best way to evaluate that is to look at the conversations that people have and the conversations that people don't have. And to be able to, ask questions like, am I able to bring a significant other on a work trip? And is that done by both gay and straight employees? Being able to ask, what was the environment like when, there was so much tension in our country over racial inequity and Black Lives Matter? What was that like in the offices, or what was that like in the Zoom rooms of the firm? And you begin to get a sense of culture, not just by what the policies say, but by how the people act and the conversations that people have. And those, I think, are the best signs that you can look for. And I think within that, I would also urge, and I'll give my LinkedIn address in a second here, I would also urge talking to people in the firm. That's why events like Reaching Out are so great at the career fair, but also talk to people who've left the firm. Use your LinkedIn network and use networks of other folks like myself, so that you're able to find out what's it really like inside of that company. And particularly in a virtual environment, that's harder and harder to know, but there are certainly people there who will be glad to give you some help in that regard. Now, please, 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 this is not an infomercial to run out and buy my book. I did write a book this year. I'm very proud of it. It took me a lot of time, and I am thrilled to say that I have it. But I am happy, especially because I know many of you are graduate students living on a limited budget with a ton of reading that you're not getting done already. I am glad if you reach out to me. You can go to my website, jdschramm.com. There's a way to do a little contact form. It'll send me your email. Just say, I was at the Ramba session, and I'm happy to send you the chapter on LGBTQ, the whole Lavender Diamond that I went through. I'm happy to send you that chapter of the book, and my publisher will let me do that at no cost. And I also have a resource page that includes a lot of YouTubes to follow, as well as some of the Lokino talks and TED and TEDx talks, as well as books on this. And I don't use it for any marketing. I just want to be a resource to you in that regard. And if there are questions that you didn't get asked today, I can stay in this room till 10 after is what they've told me. So I will be glad to try to stay and answer stuff. But I'm also glad to give it a shot by email, or jump on the phone and do a phone call or do a Zoom call. At the end of the day, what I want you to be left with is, I loved being able to present this information, but let's keep the conversation going. And I hope that some of what I've provided to you on executive presence will enable you to have conversations with others in your school or in your firm, and for us to keep the conversation going more widely. With that, thank you very much, and I will let you log off and go on to your next event, and I will also try to answer any other questions that come up here for the next few minutes till they shut the room down. Thank you all. Lahawanda, that is a great question. You could actually take that question and just alter it for a firm that you're applying to, or a firm that you want to get to know. That's great. I hope Madeline is still on and could hear that. That's a really awesome question. What a neat group of folks. Even though we couldn't see or hear one another, this was just a lot of fun to get to do. Ooh, I look a little milky right now, but my background looks great. Don't know if that made it better. Mark Meyer, thank you. That made my day. Jeff Kuhlman, large Fortune 300 company. Wow, without any out LGBT execs. Jeff, the first thought I go to, Jeff, is to think of people in the industry. So if your firm doesn't have any, but some of your competitors have people who have spoken, that somebody who at least would be thoughtful and would know people inside your industry. I think that's what the first thought that I would have. The second thought, Jeff, and Jeff, you've got some awesome questions. I've really appreciated your participation today. The second thought I have is to look at alliances with other employee resource groups. And so the way in which Hispanic leaders have been treated, or African-American leaders have been treated, and their ambassadors, their senior leaders who have helped them may be able to help mentor you as well. They may be facing some of the same issues. And so I would look for gay people in your industry, and then I would look for other marginalized people within your firm, is my thought. Okay, we are down to just about 20 folks now. Oh. Jens, are you in the room?
Hey, JD.
Hey, I didn't know you were in there. I heard you and now I don't. I don't know what I did wrong.
I can't hear you anymore now.
Oh, I muted myself. Oh, only one person can speak at a time. So can you hear me now? I'm glad I didn't do this during the presentation itself. I think I'm allowing Jens to talk. Let me see if I can unallow you to talk. No, I don't know what I did. Via. How, oh, wow. Are you able to hear me? Can somebody give me a yes in the discussion box? Okay, thanks, Via. Boy, that is a really good question. I think what I need to do, and if you can connect with me via email, I have 2 coaches that I work with that are also gender nonconforming and non-binary, and I think they will be able to answer this and give me the answers better. So let me check in with Addison and with Gina and see if they would offer thoughts. As somebody who has screwed up pronouns before or screwed up how to address people before, I always appreciate the correction. And I will admit I don't think I avoid the relationship, but I get gun shy around pronouns, and I get scared that I'll use the wrong pronoun. And so I can imagine that being difficult, and then putting emotional labor on the other person. Yeah. My first thought is keep doing what you're doing, gently correcting with a smile on your face or, oh, there we went again. Or if that's not working, maybe work through another person. If you're able to tell one of their coworkers, you know what, JD still keeps using, this word when describing me, and maybe reminding them through other people. But let me pose this to email to me via and at jd@jdschramm.com, and I'll ask this of Gina and Addison and get a more expert answer on it for you. Okay? Excellent. Thanks, Via. Well, to the 16 who are left in the room, I think we're about to be kicked out. So please be in touch by email. I have thoroughly enjoyed being here, and thank you so much. Good day, everybody. Oh, and I finally got cleared up. I was looking foggy there for a minute. Okay, I am going to shut the room off.